Hello everyone. We are reading Baby It's Cold Outside, Chapter 3, Part 2. Let's go. Daniel was just saying to Maggie in the previous line that the kitchen was too small for 2 people. So here we go. Oh, Maggie replied disheartened, her face falling and looking at her hands. Well, I suppose a shower is always a good idea. Daniel's conscience prickled at that sad, innocent look. The kitchen is quite small. He didn't meet her gaze as he said this and scratched the back of his head. It's really only meant for 1 person. I'll give you a tour after breakfast, okay? She brightened, apparently satisfied. Sure, sounds great. I forgot my crutch inside. Could you help me to the room, please? Sure, was Daniel's reply, and he rushed to scoop her up into his arms. Maggie didn't expect him to do that, just to take her under one arm and help her walk, but she appreciated this gesture more, specifically because it allowed her to bury her face in his neck and breathe in his deliciously male scent without giving away what she was doing. She bit her lip to keep from moaning out loud at the decadent scent and the tantalizing skin that lay within her grasp. She had the strangest desire to open up her mouth and kiss the spot of his pulse and feel his heart beating beneath her mouth. Here we are, Daniel said a little breathless, slowly and reluctantly placing her on the bed as if he too wanted to prolong contact. She couldn't tell if he was breathless because she was heavy or because he was as aroused as she was. She never got the opportunity to find out because he quickly pulled the wheeled office chair to the bed and left, mumbling something about the food taking a while. As soon as the door closed behind him, Maggie let out a slow, heavy breath. What the heck am I doing? She asked herself, and moved to accomplish the difficult task of washing in cold water with an injured foot. As soon as he had closed the door, Daniel softly leaned against it and released a deep breath. The walk to his bedroom had been a torturous one, even though it had only been a few feet away. As soon as he had picked her up, he regretted. His soap mixed with her own uniquely feminine scent had wafted to his nose and made him want to bury his nose in her hair, or better yet, in her neck as she seemed to have been doing to him. He moved toward the kitchen and rubbed his neck in the spot where he could feel the ghost of her shallow breaths on his skin. Thinking about it, he was almost certain he heard her moan at some point. He had glanced down and saw her biting on her luscious, full bottom lip. He was so tempted to replace her teeth with his own, but shook his head to clear from the thought. He also felt the full evidence of his arousal and decided to rinse his face with ice-cold water from the tap to cool down. It worked and managed to dampen his ardor somewhat as he tried to focus on making a meal in his kitchen. He had been right about her, he silently acknowledged, whilst hovering over his fireplace and lighting a fire. She was dangerous, but not as he had initially thought. She was the first woman he had honestly desired in 10 years, and the power of that desire scared him. He didn't know her from a bar of soap, and he knew that in a couple of days, maybe even a couple of hours, she would leave his home. And there was no way he could follow her. He couldn't leave his home, not after everything had been taken from him 10 years ago. This was the only safe haven he'd had since that fateful day. And the fact that he may even be contemplating leaving it was a huge thing to him. It scared him to his core. This proved to him that Maggie was indeed a dangerous individual. The safest option for him would be to try to avoid her, but he knew that in his small cabin that would be impossible. Get to know her better. She could be crazy. She could still be crazy, his mind screamed as he put the cold water on the fire and prepared the oats for breakfast. But he highly doubted she was crazy. In fact, he noticed she was funny, excitable, sweet, caring, and kind. He suspected she was intelligent and knew she was patient to a degree because he had really been insufferable in that past evening. He'd seen her about to lose her temper, then just close her eyes, breathe deeply, and continue as if he hadn't been short or nasty with her. She had even done this several times this morning when he felt himself softening toward her. She reminded him very much of his mother, he thought with a smile as he went back to the fire to check the progress of the water. His mother, Felicia, had been a very patient woman. His father, Ben, involved him in many of his calamitous experiments, which always caused a gigantic mess, but ended in the two of them bonding over how not to fix something or how to improve something. Once his mother had discovered the mess, she would look as if she was going to explode, then take a deep breath, tell them to clean up the mess, and kiss her husband and son, reminding them both how very lucky they were that she loved them. Daniel chuckled at the memory, then suddenly sharp pain pierced his chest, and he had a problem taking in a steady breath. Wheezing and starting to become dizzy, he rushed to the cupboard where his first aid supplies lay. He quickly forced the cupboard open and threw everything to the floor with a loud crash as his knees gave in. His vision was starting to darken, and he heard a faint, muffled, concerned feminine voice that could be calling his name, but his attention was solely focused on finding the inhaler that would give him precious oxygen. The voice sounded a bit louder, though, still muffled as he reached the inhaler and took a deep breath. He shouted back between puffs of air. Fine, just knocked something over. Are you sure? Came the shout back, and he vaguely realized it was muffled because it came from behind his bedroom door. He nodded, then rolled his eyes as he realized she wouldn't be able to see the response. I'm okay, Daniel called back, glad to have reclaimed his breath. You can get back to showering. Breakfast is almost ready. Daniel, she sounded concerned as he stood and began to clean up the mess around him. I'm good. Do you like oats? He tried to distract her because he had a feeling she would come out of there just to make sure he really meant what he had said. I love them. Reminds me of home, she said with what sounded like a smile in her voice. Good, he replied, coming to stand before the door so they didn't have to continue screaming. Go get ready. It'll be finished in the next 20 minutes or so. Okay, thanks, she said loudly, and he waited till he heard the click of the bathroom door's lock before he breathed out roughly and slid down to sit outside of the door to his room, feeling ashamed. Thinking about his parents always caused that reaction in him, so he refused to think about them. And if Maggie was going to cause him to think about them more often, then he'd have to hope he could get rid of her. He always found his episodes embarrassing, but they had lessened over time as he kept himself busy with other things. But with her here now, it seemed his past wasn't exactly as far behind him as he had hoped. Grim, Daniel was swept out of his musings by the sound of bubbling water and sprang into action to make their breakfast. He had some berries that were thawing out in his kitchen sink, which he thought he could add to give it some more flavor. He also prepared a spare pot of water for coffee, since he noticed she seemed to like it as much as he did. Half an hour later, after Daniel had finished breakfast and dressed in the dark blue jeans and a grey jersey, Maggie joined him dressed in a grey pair of leggings, one of his giant red jerseys, and booties. Her hair was wet and braided into some thick kind of plait, but a few tendrils of errant hair still escaped, and when she half-stepped, half-glided with her chair into the golden sunlight streaming through a window, Daniel felt his chest and throat tighten. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to speak and lighten the atmosphere. You look better in my clothing than I do. Maggie chuckled. I don't exactly believe you, but thanks anyway. She just paused to take a breath. Ooh, is that berries I see over there? She came closer and turned her chair to sit on it before a coffee table. Daniel tisked with irritation, then moved her to the comfier armchair and elevated her foot on the other chair. You need to keep this foot up if you want it to heal soon, he chastised. Thank you, doctor, she said dryly and rolled her eyes as he placed the tray on her lap, then subsequently placed a bowl with oats in it and berries strategically placed to add to a circular pattern of cream. You can thank me when it's healed, he said, and moved to a smaller pot, uncovering it and letting the smell of coffee permeate the environment. Ooh, that smells good, she moaned and closed her eyes in ecstasy. Daniel chuckled at her reaction. Do you take milk and sugar? Maggie opened her eyes. Not with my morning cup. Daniel arched an eyebrow and bent to carefully pour the steaming liquid into the 2 cups he had earlier set on the table. She continued, wanting to justify her odd choice. In the morning when I wake up, I'm usually groggy, so I drink coffee as strong and as bitter as I can take it to wake up. He nodded, apparently accepting her justification, and carefully placed the coffee on the table before her. She waited until he took a seat before she closed her eyes and put her hands together and said something softly. Daniel was so surprised he almost spat out the first spoon of delicious oats. She heard him sputtering as she finally opened her eyes and giggled. "Sorry, old habits." It's fine," Daniel said, still slightly surprised, and reached for the box of tissues he left on his coffee table and wiped the oats from his mouth and chin. "Sorry, it's been a while since I've heard someone pray." "You don't?" she asked softly, placing the oats on the table and reached for the coffee, trying not to sound accusatory. When she glanced back up at Daniel's face, he was scowling into his bowl of porridge. Maggie sighed and took a few sips as she stared into the fire. They continued the meal in silence as the fire crackled, pushing the awkwardness away. Maggie complimented the meal twice, but only received grunts from Daniel, who apparently wasn't in the mood to talk. Once they had finished breakfasting, Maggie reminded him of his promise. Daniel, you mentioned something about a tour?" This was said with a small smile as she attempted to draw him out of his inner fortress. He sighed in response, but the sound was more tired than condescending. "I suppose we should get to it then," he said and stood, stretching. "Just let me take care of the dishes first." Maggie nodded and gave a grim smile, then waited, watching the fire until Daniel came back into the room. She really hoped that they would be able to get along, but perhaps it was in Daniel's nature to be surly. She moved to stand, but Daniel tisked and placed her in the wheelchair. "Sit," he said. "I'll push you around, even though I shouldn't have offered because you should be resting that foot." Maggie turned and smiled up at him. "Thank you, that's very kind of you." Daniel was entranced by that smile, but managed to stop himself just before he leaned forward and kissed her. He shook his head to clear it, and Maggie gave him an odd look, but the mossy green color of her eyes told him that she wanted that kiss perhaps as much as he did. This is the lounge," he said quickly to distract her, and wheeled her towards the entrance to the kitchen, then turned the chair around so she could survey the room in the little sunlight that was creeping through the snow. Maggie made appreciative noises and commented on the things she liked most about the room. "But what I don't understand is why there are two desks on either side of the room facing away from the fireplace," she said and looked up at him, trying to gauge his response. "The one facing the wall with the computer on it is for work, and the other one is for projects. I like to use the natural light when I'm painting, drawing, or making something." He shrugged as if it didn't mean much. "No way, you're an artist?" she asked, amazed. He blushed and looked away but didn't answer the question. "You do anything you can when you have a lot of time to yourself." "Okay, I remember you saying that you invest in stuff, and I know that you can cook very well. But what do you write?" she asked, but at this he looked a little offended. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" he asked, slightly annoyed that she didn't know he was a famous author, but he supposed he should be relieved. "Not really, I mean, I kind of just met you yesterday, but should I know you?" "I would think so, but I guess it's for the best," he shrugged and turned the chair toward the kitchen. Maggie turned her head and rubbed her neck where it was starting to hurt from looking up at Daniel for so long. "You sure we didn't meet before? Because you do seem kind of familiar." Daniel stopped pushing her forward and sat on his heels before her. Maggie's breath hitched in her throat and she glanced at his lips. She really thought he would kiss her then. No, he didn't. I would have remembered. He looked at her lips as he said that last part. She swallowed and rubbed her upper arms to make the goosebumps go away, because there was nothing she could do for the butterflies in her stomach. Daniel frowned and took over rubbing her arms. In an instant, the moment was gone. "Are you cold? You should have said something." She was loath to say no, because she wanted to keep his hands on her body, but also knew that if she didn't say yes, he might understand how very attracted to him she was, and she was quite embarrassed by that fact. A little," she admitted with a grimace and bit her lip at the lie. Daniel tisked and removed an Afghan from the nearby couch. He then laid over her front and tucked it around her. "Better?" he asked, looking into her eyes. "Much, thank you," Maggie blushed, averting her gaze. Daniel smiled and rolled his eyes. It was funny how shy she could be after such a simple act of kindness. Anyway, he said, getting up and going behind the chair again. The tour must go on. She giggled and snuggled into the blanket. Indeed, maestro. He smiled and pushed the chair into the small dark blue tiled kitchen with red and yellow cupboards and white utensils. Wow, Maggie said, stunned. Yeah, my mom was an artist and liked the style of painting called Fauvism. They make use of primary colors, he explained. And when they bought this place, she noticed that the kitchen was really only big enough for one person. Luckily, she preferred it that way. My dad couldn't bake toast if he tried. Maggie chuckled, appreciating the love she could feel in the kitchen and understanding that he really hadn't meant to insult her earlier. There truly was not enough space in the kitchen for 2 people to work. She could also see that Daniel loved his parents very much. Do you have any of our paintings? I'd like to see them if I could. When she looked at his face, the fierce expressions she saw frightened her. No, he said, jaw tight, not looking at her, and wheeled her to the room beside that one, which was a bathroom. Maggie made appreciative sounds complimenting the grey-tiled and robin's egg blue bathroom with red accessories, but she wasn't really paying attention. She was focusing on the look that Daniel had given her. His eyes seemed wild, as if he were trapped, and the fierce expression hadn't been so much fierce as it had been panicked. It was a combination of several emotions: pain, fear, anger, and disgust. But it hadn't really been directed at her. It was more like at himself. Daniel was hiding something, and she wanted to know what it was, but she had the distinct feeling that he was not going to openly share it with her. She would have to find a way to fish it out of him without him knowing about it. Otherwise, she had a feeling he would close up to her totally. Maggie, you've been silent for a while. Sorry, I was just thinking of home and missing Jared, she said sadly, glad that she was actually telling the truth and wasn't lying to him. She didn't like lying very much because she felt it was too much trouble to cover for the lie afterwards. Oh, he replied pensive. Your boyfriend? Maggie barked out a laugh. Heavens no, she chuckled. I don't have one. He's my French bulldog. I've asked my friend to take care of him while I was visiting my mother. She sighed. I hope he's not being too much of a nuisance. Oh, Daniel replied, visibly relaxing, as Maggie smiled wryly up at him, wondering why her answer made him relax. Let's continue the tour, she said, noticing the light was waning. It'll be dark soon. Right, Daniel said and pulled the chair out of the bathroom, heading towards his bedroom. Maggie gasped as she noticed a door she hadn't seen before, hidden in the passageway. It looked exactly like the cherrywood panels coming from the roof, and if she hadn't seen the light somehow glinting off the handle, she'd have missed it entirely. What's in there? She asked and looked at his face. Nothing. That look was back again. Is it storage? She asked. Yes, he said too quickly, and she realized that the room had something to do with Daniel's secret. Well, why didn't you say so? It's not important, and I think the tour is at an end. Do you think you could wheel yourself to the room? I have to get started on dinner and take a shower. He left her there and rushed back to the kitchen to get some oxygen into his lungs, followed by her growl and something that sounded suspiciously like her saying that he definitely needed a shower because his attitude stank. Maggie moved into the bedroom and closed the door behind her as forcefully as she could. She needed to let off some steam, so she swore as best as she could until she calmed down, which was slightly funny to her too, because the only cuss word she allowed herself most of the time was damn. She needed to get into that room, but she definitely couldn't do it now. Daniel would be watching her like a hawk, and perhaps even try to fortify the room better to stop her from getting in. So she could definitely not try today, and perhaps not even tomorrow. Damn it, she swore angrily, realizing that she would have to be smart if she wanted to get in there without his knowledge. This whole thing was made even more difficult because of her injury. There was no way she could sneak with the wheelie chair, so she would probably have to wait until she could be back on her feet. But who knew when she would be able to walk again? She swore again. She would just have to try harder to be nice to him. He might just accidentally let slip that he didn't have a human torture chamber in the next room. But Maggie was still too angry to face him. She needed to cool down, and what usually helped was reading, so she went to the shelf to pick out a book. Strangely, she noted that most of the books were by the same author, D.R. Winthrop. There were 2 by Felicia Winthrop and a couple by R.R. Winthrop, and a book of poetry by Ben D. Winthrop. She wondered where she recognized the surname from but pushed it aside. She picked out a book called Return by D.R. Winthrop and put it on the bed while she arranged a comfy place for herself to sit and elevate her foot. Okay, I think that we should stop there for today. Our scripture of the day comes from Proverbs 18 verse 1 to 2, and we are reading from the World English Bible, which says, "An unfriendly man pursues selfishness and defies all sound judgment. A fool has no delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own opinion." What I feel God is saying is that we need to get comfortable with dissenting voices and people who disagree with our opinions. You don't have to be right all the time, and you don't have to be the only one who is right. It's good to listen to someone who disagrees with you and not just write them off because you disagree. Consider the merits of what they say without attaching your bias to that person. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you want to read ahead, my book is listed in the description below. Thanks again for joining me and have a wonderful day. Bye.